Welcome to part 2 of the 200mm focal length for the Canon Lens Wars series by SLR Lounge. We had a total of 7 lenses in the 200mm grouping, so in the first part we discussed just the two 200mm primes. In this part 2, we have the 5 zoom/telephoto lenses that cross the 200mm focal length. Then finally in part 3, we're going to choose our favorites from each and give you an overall comparison with our conclusion. For those that are new to the SLR Lounge Canon Lens Wars series, be sure to check out the actual teaser video where we introduce the entire series, we talk about our testing methodology and what we're looking for in each of these images. And also check out all the other videos and articles on slrlounge.com. This is part 2 of the 200mm focal length Lens Wars where we're going to compare these 5 zoom/telephoto lenses. And if you saw the 100mm Lens Wars series, you're going to recognize many, actually probably most of these lenses because they're all the same. So in our lineup, we have the 70-200 f4, we have the 70-200 f2.8, this is the non-IS version. We have the 70-200 2.8 IS, and this is the Mark II version. We also have the 28-300, I believe this is from 3.5 to 5.6, and then we have the 100-400, which is 4.5 to 5.6. So again, we're going to start from the top with each of these lenses at their WOA or wide open aperture by doing some basic visual comparisons, viewing the images full screen on a 27-inch 3K resolution display. Now through the 70-100mm focal lengths, we ended up with the 70-200, the 2.8L and the 2.8L IS Mark II as our favorite lenses for their overall look and image quality and so forth. So we're going to make sure and see if everything is kind of still the same at 200mm. Now at the 200mm focal length and with each lens at their WOA, the only 2 lenses that really stood out were the 70-200 f2.8L Mark II and the non-IS version once again. Now the non-IS version of the lens did appear to have some sort of small light flare that was entering the lens. It was creating a bit of a flare, and we know from previous that basically when we do get a little bit of a flare, it's going to reduce a bit of the contrast and the overall sharpness and so forth. But from previous tests, we know that the 70-200 non-IS is very similar, almost identical in terms of image quality, overall aesthetics, and looks to the 70-200 2.8L IS Mark II. So let's just assume for now that they would be the same here as well. Now in viewing the images full screen, overall contrast, color, sharpness, really everything was kind of difficult to distinguish from image to image, particularly at this focal length. The only way that I was able to differentiate from these different lenses was to look and to see if I could identify differences in the amounts of bokeh that was shown, and for which basically the two 70-200 f2.8s and the f4 had basically the most bokeh. Now the sharpness was actually pretty tough to distinguish as well. I could only differentiate sharpness when zoomed in and comparing the images side by side. Most likely the reason why these lenses are looking more and more similar at this focal length is due to the lens compression of being at basically 200mm. And at 200mm, we get a bit more powerful bokeh in each lens. Once again, I still end up preferring the 70-200 f2.8s overall. So let's go ahead and step up to our widest common aperture. Now the widest common aperture in this situation, our WCA, is going to be f5.6. And once we step up to f5.6, we notice that the 70-200 f2.8 IS Mark II, this really jumps in front of the crowd in terms of the overall image quality and sharpness. It becomes obvious simply at full screen that the 70-200 f2.8 Mark II is better than the pack, and this can be verified as we kind of zoom in, we look at the model and the area around her dress, we can see visually better contrast, more sharpness, and so forth. Now interestingly, while the 70-200 f2.8 Mark II had the most bokeh when wide open, with all the lenses at their WCA of 5.6, the 70-200 Mark II seemed to fall just a bit into second place, just right behind the 70-200 f4. But still, as far as the overall, say, looks, contrast, clarity, and so forth, the 70-200L Mark II is still my favorite in the pack. So at 200mm, we really end up with the same conclusion. The 70-200 f2.8L Mark II is going to give you the best overall image quality, the most bokeh, and the best aesthetics to that bokeh. Overall, the best low light performance with this fixed aperture of f2.8 and image stabilization, but if the $2,500 price tag is too high, well, you can get the majority of the image performance out of the $1,500 70-200 f2.8L without image stabilization. The 100-400 and the 28-300 lenses were adequate when it came to sharpness and overall performance, and also include image stabilization. But of course, at around f5 to f6, they're stuck with 1.5 to 2 stops less light than these fixed 2.8 lenses. In addition, at the other focal lengths, they're kind of middle of the road performers in terms of bokeh aesthetics, although at 200mm they start to look quite awesome. So if I needed the ultimate in kind of focal length flexibility, I would still choose the 28-300 between these two lenses. The only lens here I probably would avoid is really the 7200 f4, and not that the image performance wasn't good, it was pretty solid. But for the money, you're better off in terms of image quality and low light performance with the 7200 f2.8L without image stabilization. Only if you absolutely must have image stabilization, you need the 7200 focal length, and you can't step up to the 7200 f2.8L IS Mark II, would I say that at that point it would make sense to get the 7200 f4. I hope you all enjoyed the 200mm zoom/telephoto focal length in the SLR Lounge Canon Lens Wars series. Now be sure to check out the actual article on slrlounge.com by clicking the link in the description below the video, where you can see more example images, more information on each lens, as well as links on where to purchase. My name is Pye, and I'll see you all in the next video.